We talk all of the time about potential Philadelphia Eagles that are going to break out this year, and we always seem to talk about the Georgia guys, but who else on this roster could go from good to great starting at training camp next week? We'll get into it and more on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everybody every day all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Training camp is 1 week away for the Philadelphia Eagles. Football is right around the corner. Just get through one more week of the summer, and we've got football to talk about in Southern Philadelphia. And Gino, yesterday we were kind of talking about like what battles we're going to get to watch. What battles will there be for starting jobs? And it could really just be right guard, maybe cornerback, depending how you feel about those candidates on that side of the football. But overall, like it's a year that there's a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of questions, maybe not in the form of battles, but more breakouts, right? And we've talked a lot about like the need to have these Georgia defensive players you invested in so much in the last few years break out, like Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, maybe even Keely Ringo to a degree, more so down the road. Is there anybody else you think, though, like non-Georgia players, because those are the guys we always focus on? Like, who's a guy that maybe he's already solid that could go from good to great this year? Like, who's somebody that's on the rise that could be a star, but they weren't a former Bulldog?
I'm thinking about the safety position right now, and I'm thinking about a guy in Reed Blankenship, for example, who, if he can kind of go back to that second safety role and he can just be who he is and he doesn't have to be this premier level player, I really think the league is going to start to notice him. And there were a lot of metrics when it came to overall safety play that he was towards the top of the league, one of the more underrated guys at that position. Somebody is going to have to step up there, Lou. Is it going to be Cooper DeJean right away? Is it going to be Sidney Brown? Hopefully he does step up, but I think a real breakout could happen from Reed Blankenship to where you're saying, oh, yeah, it makes a lot of sense why this guy's going into his third year of starting.
Yeah.
And we always talk about year 3 being that tool for evaluation. Man, this could be the year where he really takes that leap because of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, because of the burden that is alleviated by having better players around him. And I think we are going to notice him a lot more because you're probably not going to throw at Darius Slay a ton. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's probably going to be locking down those tight ends and running backs. Teams are going to try and target your, let's say, quote unquote, lesser options in the defensive backfield. Hey, that's a huge opportunity for Reed Blankenship to step up. And maybe that's not somebody that people were thinking of right away because in Philadelphia, we kind of know who he is. But in terms of a national sense, I think he's still an underrated football player, man. I
agree. And I don't think the story has been written about who he is as a player already. I think he's going to end up being more of that low-end tight safety 2. Maybe you want Sidney Brown. I've always said you want him to end up, being the player that's featured more here. But that's not to say Reed Blankenship can't become a star, like you're saying. It's kind of a reputation season where the Eagles did just enough where they have other options if he doesn't take a step. They do have Sidney Brown. They do have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but they didn't do anything to outright replace him, right? So it really is up to him what he becomes. And I think if you look at the first half of last year, if you get that player and more, yeah, he's going to hold off Sidney Brown and could be your best safety in that secondary. However, if he's the guy more in the second half of the year, he'll probably end up being, he's always going to have a floor here, right? Like that's why they gave him that extension already. They know they want him to at least be the safety 3 long term. But if he's more of that guy in the second half of the year that was kind of a coverage liability, then he becomes more of a rotational player. So this really is a reputation season for him.
I wouldn't give any of the guys in the secondary any credit for that second half. And at the same time, I wouldn't take a ton away from them because they were just completely broken as a unit. Like there were no answers from Matt Patricia. There was no answers from Sean Desai early on. But you're right. If he can't become that player, then I think he is just that solid role player, which we have been talking about. But man, he has the tools. He has the tools. You talk about an instinctual player, somebody who tackles really well. Is he the best in coverage? Absolutely not. But if he could play with his eyes to the quarterback and make plays on the football, that's where he operates best. And I truly believe now that he is in this defense with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and he could be in that quarters half of the field where those guys are playing a lot of zone coverage, that's where he's going to excel at the National Football League.
I think, Gino, flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, this is a guy that just has such high expectations, or I should say just such a huge, very high level of a standard, I should say, to get to because of who he's replacing in Jason Kelce. And I think he'll never be Jason Kelce, right? That's one of the best, if not the best center in NFL history. But I do think Cam Jurgens is a guy that can go from a solid, good right guard last year to a great star center. Like, I think he could be your Jordan Mailata, where Mailata comes in. Is he ever going to be Jason Peters? Or we even said this about Andre Dillard. Probably not. Jason Peters is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's an all-time great. But Jordan Mailata, like, he did get out of that shadow. He is seen now from PFF and pretty much any other platform that ranks these players and grades offensive linemen. He is seen as consensus at least a top 10 offensive lineman in the league. Some say he would be a top 5 player. I think Cam Jurgens could be that guy where, is he ever Jason Kelce? No, but we're not missing Jason Kelce. Like, we've honestly never missed Jason Peters as much as we respect and love number 71. We haven't batted an eye since he's been gone. And I think that's going to be the case with Jurgens too. Some people are wondering, like, with him changing positions, how it will go. But remember, like, this is his natural position. And when you look at his strengths and weaknesses, I think he fits much better at center than he does at right guard.
Especially how Philadelphia likes their guard.
Yeah, how they use it with mobility and athleticism. Like, he fits this way more.
If you look at what they want at guard, and Steltman always goes back to Brandon Brooks, he wants somebody who's big, just freakishly strong, powerful, and has crazy length. That's not who Cam Jurgens is.
That's why I think they might like Becton there, honestly.
Was it good that he was able to take on that role and sit next to Jason
Kelce? Yeah, he did fine.
And learn that, and he did really good. And
yeah.
The episode that I did on who deserves a contract extension, he was the number one guy for me. And somebody in the YouTube comments made a great point. He said, even if you extend Jurgens and he doesn't work out at center and you have to go and find somebody else, at worst, you know he can play guard.
I was going to say, he's a solid right guard player. Yeah, and he'll probably end up being your fourth or fifth best lineman, but he can be your Isaac Seumalo. Like, you did notice a difference.
Not a bad thing to be at all.
Right. Halfway through the year when he got hurt last year, you did notice a difference, especially in the run game.
The thing with Cam Jurgens is he can't, and I don't think he will, fall into the trap of having to be Jason Kelce.
Right.
The media pressure is going to be there, right? Like, the first game he looks rough, like, can the Eagles do it without Kelce, so on and so forth. But he has to know who he is. He's a natural center. That's where he came from at Nebraska. He did everything this organization wanted him to do last year to where he fell into place, and he did get better from his rookie year to his sophomore campaign. And the two guys that we had mentioned, they're in year 3. Year 3 is so instrumental for that evaluation process.
Yeah, because
it is the make or break. It's the fork in the road.
Players don't get 4 years.
Are you going to be a time starter, or are you going to get replaced? Yeah. That's really what it is.
I agree. And there's guys that after year 3 suddenly become a star or do improve or do regress, right? Yeah. Like, after 3 years, not every NFL player is labeled like that is who they are forever. But the majority of the time, honestly, if you're not going to take that step after 3 seasons, honestly, sometimes after 2, odds are you're probably not going to do it.
I always say that football is overcomplicated, and it's simple at the end of the day. You can either play the sport or you can't play the sport, right? And I go back to Sidney Jones, and when they drafted him, it was like, did they give him enough time to maybe develop into the player that he could have been? I don't think they did.
Same with Rasul Douglas.
But at the same time, they saw enough of him where they're like, okay, we have made our decision. Even though it's 3-4 years into this thing, we had known that he wasn't the player he was before that Achilles injury. Those guys in the building,
you could see
with the medicals, with all the behind the scenes stuff, they know better than we do. But the guys that we're talking about now, you can see that curve. It's going up. It's continuing to go up. And are there guys that will plateau? Yeah, that's a bell curve, man. The average falls right in that middle. But are there guys that could go from good to great? I think Cam Jurgens has that ability to go from good to great, right? And be talked about as one of the best. Reed, I don't know if he's ever going to hit like great to elite status, but I still think he can put the league on notice to where you're saying, oh, the Eagles have another safety outside of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, right? And Cam Jurgens isn't looked at as the replacement for Jason Kelce and the fourth best offensive lineman. He's looked at as a top 10 caliber player at his position, and that's okay. They don't have
Jordan
to be
Mailata's not Jason Peters, but that he's still a top 10 player.
Yeah, they don't have to be Hall of Fame players.
Yeah,
like that's what you have to separate in this evaluation.
I totally agree. I think Cam Jurgens and Reed Blankenship are two pretty good options because, again, we focus on, and because it's justifiably so, they've invested first and second round picks and have traded future picks for these guys, and there's a lot riding on the Georgia kids on the defensive side of the ball, but there's other players that could break out. Yeah, I was listening to Move the Sticks the other day, and Daniel Jeremiah was kind of labeling players based on like blue chip, green chip, and he said the green is the good to great, which kind of got me thinking about this, like who could be the Eagles player that is solid right now. Cam Jurgens, Reed Blankenship, solid players. Can they become blue chip players on both sides of the ball? Maybe so. We'll see. Starting next week at training camp for the Philadelphia Eagles. And another battle that could be happening next week is for QB2 between Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee. How confident are we in those two players behind Jalen Hurts? We'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
This Wednesday edition of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. With FanDuel, it lets you stay in the action of sports whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you are in. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers to boost or a bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone, every day, all summer long. All you have to do, grab your mobile device or go on your computer, go to FanDuel.com or download that app and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and heck, the Olympics are right around the corner. You got the Home Run Derby All-Star Game for the MLB just happened. You got the second half coming back. All four major sports are going to be going on in a couple months. Go over to FanDuel and get in on the action today. We thank FanDuel for sponsoring this edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, got to turn on the volume with all the shouting. We'll make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Gino, yesterday we talked about, like, there might not be many jobs available on the Eagles when it comes to starting positions on offense and defense. Maybe there's one each. Right guard, maybe corner, maybe. I guess you could say wide receiver 3 can be considered a starting spot. But when it comes to like depth battles, there's a lot of them. And I don't know if there will be a fair battle, but behind Jalen Hurts, there are two options that with Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee, I'm curious what your confidence level is in those two compared to like in the post Nick Foles backup era or even like post Jalen Hurts. Like how confident are you in those? I think Pickett is the guy. I don't know if it's going to be a fair competition, but between those two combined, like how confident are you in Pickett and McKee versus like the Josh McCown, Nate Sudfeld group or Gardner Minshew, Marcus Mariota? Like where do you think it ranks in the post Foles Hurts kind of QB2 world?
So was Sudfeld ever actually the number 2 guy?
No, he was 2019. It looked like he was in line to be, and then they traded for McCown in the summer.
Yep. I think it's a better situation than Josh McCown simply based on the age. I think you have two guys that at worst are young and good athletes. Kenny Pickett's a better athlete. Tanner McKee, he's tall, he's lanky.
Aggressive passer.
But he's an aggressive passer, man. Yep. He has that frame and that just that wingspan you look for in a pocket passing type of quarterback. And I think we saw in the preseason, I think a lot of people, especially us on this show, are super excited about the 3 games that we get to watch Tanner McKee coming up here in the summer. But Kenny Pickett, former first-round pick, former starting quarterback, I wouldn't put the confidence as high as a guy like Marcus. I think Marcus brought you a higher floor. Same thing with a guy like Gardner Minshew. The thing with Kenny Pickett that I believe maybe transfers best is how they play the game.
Okay.
I think him and Jalen are going to play it very similar.
Stylistically, yeah.
Marcus wasn't that player when they had him in his. If you got Marcus 10 years ago, I'd be like, oh, those guys are mirrors of each other. But Kenny, they're going to have to tailor this offense to be a little bit shorter in the passing game. We know he doesn't have the arm that a guy like Tanner McKee or Jalen Hurts does, but you can still do those read option, the RPO game. Like, you're not going to limit yourself. Like Gardner Minshew, for example, when they were playing the Saints, I believe it was the Saints. It was the Saints or Dallas, when they're doing a read and he just tries to boot this thing and it looks like he's stuck in mud and the defensive end just comes in and cleans him out. If you have Kenny Pickett to at least use his legs, which we have seen him be a weapon in that area, and not turn the ball over, anything from 10 to 12 yards, that's where you're going to make your bread and butter, Kenny Pickett. But if we have to get into a shootout and he had to replace Jalen Hurts,
I don't feel great about that.
I don't feel too
like. Can he
confident.
I agree. Like, can he do what Minshew did in Dallas in 2022?
See, I don't think he can.
I agree. I think
it like that.
I think you're right to put it stylistically. He fits better than pretty much anybody since Jalen Hurts was the backup, especially with a mobile quarterback being your starter now. You want that transition. But I think when it comes to like production, I was definitely more confident in Gardner Minshew. I would say I'm more confident in Pickett, though, than I agree with you, over Josh McCown.
For sure.
And I'd even say over Marcus Mariota, because although the mobility was there for Marcus last year, like, his passing was absolutely shot. So I think he would be ranked like below Minshew for me, but ahead of McCown and ahead of Mariota. The one thing, though, that's interesting, I do personally think Tanner McKee, if he had to come into the game, would be better than Pickett. And I'm not sure he's going to get that chance after they traded for Pickett. And I don't get, their quarterback draft strategy, because they always talk about like wanting to develop quarterbacks. They take them late in drafts. They've done this many times. Or they trade for him. A Nate Sudfeld, Clayton Thorson, Tanner McKee, even Carson Strong didn't work out. But like, they've tried this before, hoping for one of these guys to become an inexpensive backup. It's what they did with Jalen Hurts in 2020. But then they really never give those guys a chance. Like Sudfeld, as you mentioned, was never QB2. Even after Foles left, they brought in Josh McCown. McKee really isn't getting that chance now, even though he was a star in the preseason last year. Like, what is the point of drafting those players? Like, I get wanting an experienced veteran backup quarterback, but then, I don't know, for me, like, why are you drafting these players if you never give them that chance? I don't know.
Clayton Thorson couldn't throw the football.
No, I get that, but for McKee, like, and even Nate Sudfeld, they were hyping up for years as like a potential trade chip, and then
he almost started a playoff game.
I know, but he never had a chance behind Foles, and then he finally gets that chance, and then they trade for McCown. So it's like, what is the like idea behind that? Like, is McKee ever going to be QB2?
I think it's the coach versus front office.
Yeah, there feels like a disconnect with this strategy.
Having a veteran guy, the coach knows that I'm at least. So we do this in our All-Star game circuit, right? Like in the All-Star game, we have 5 hours to evaluate these guys. We need quarterbacks that are at least going to put the ball in the range of the wide receiver. I say
what you talk about all the time for the preseason.
You have to give these guys the ability to be evaluated around the football, right? And Tanner McKee, I see your reasoning why you feel that he would be a better asset for this team if he is in the game, because if he does show even an ounce of that confidence that we had saw in him in the preseason and gives A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith a chance.
Maybe I'm thinking ceiling over floor, probably.
I get it. I don't know if the strategy is necessarily the best. I don't know if their evaluation of the position behind their star is always the best when it comes to development.
I think they're scared to give them a chance because there is that fear of unknown.
The whole NFL is, though.
Yeah. But then don't draft a quarterback. Like, and I trust me, I get it. Like when you lose your starter, all you want is just somebody to make sure the car stays on the road, like the train stays on the tracks. Like, I understand that. But again, then don't draft somebody. Like, use that pick for another position. I don't know.
Well, then they get the Carson Strongs that can't even throw it in the preseason, and you get the Matt McGloins, and you get those situations which we were trying to avoid, right? So if you have at least one guy, like I think of Rocky Lombardi for us this year at CGS, like he was a 6-year senior, but he at least put the ball on the money for guys. That's what Tanner McKee can do. He can put the ball on the money. We saw it last year in the preseason. Can he do it in the regular season? I hope that we don't have to ever get there. You have to hope that we never get there, because the reason that you never saw Nate Sudfeld in action was because that they had a better backup in Nick Foles, who was lightning in a bottle. But outside of that, the times that they have gone to the backup, Lou, we've talked about these stories here on Locked On Eagles. Outside of Foles, it's never gotten them to the promised land. So you have to hope that it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, for sure.
A little bit more confidence in McCown, a little bit more confidence maybe on par with Marcus Mariota, but I don't feel as good as the Gardner Minshew room. I mean, he's a starter right now for the Raiders for a reason. He was a starter last year for the Colts.
They almost made the playoffs with Minshew in Indianapolis last year. That was again, he didn't fit, like you said. The offense had to switch over.
It made no sense why he was the backup at that point, but he was good.
Yeah,
I mean,
but he
and
put
you
up
see
points.
why teams want that type of player, right?
Yeah.
The one thing a backup can do that will always give them the benefit of the doubt is take a chance. Like, don't hold on to the ball. Don't double putt. Like, just get the ball out of your hand. At least let them be evaluated. And we'll see. This preseason is going to be big, man. Like, I wouldn't let Jalen Hurts touch the field at all, if we're being honest.
I agree.
I don't want to even put him in harm's way. Those three guys, they got, 12 quarters to figure it out? Let's see how this battle goes. I think at the end of the day, you can kind of cement Kenny Pickett in there as the guy just because you gave up that pick swap to third for a fourth, and just because he is a former first, and now
maybe they think they can trade him. I don't know.
If I'm him, though, you're not settled on being a backup yet at this point in your career, right?
No,
like you're taking this in stride and hoping that there is an opportunity for you. So that tape better look.
He better look like McKee. I was gonna say he better look like McKee.
Yeah, he better blow him out of the water if he wants his career to be pro.
And it did sound like Pickett looked good in the spring, so that's good. And McKee has too. So I'm pretty confident in them. Again, not as much as Minshew, but over the other guys in the post Foles Hurts era of QB2. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, our non-Eagles NFL take of the week, and it has to do with risers and fallers across the league, who maybe some are getting undeserved hype, maybe some aren't getting enough hype. We'll get into that coming up next, right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Once again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, wrapping things up on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles with our non-Eagles NFL take of the week. And Gino, this had to do with, I think, contenders on both sides, or maybe some sleepers as well. I was watching Receiver, the new Netflix documentary, which took over for quarterback, and you see, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel in it, a lot of 49ers coverage there. You see the Brandon Ayuk trade request this week, and I'm like, is San Francisco going to be is it maybe the fall of that run they've had for, 5 to 7 years? And that kind of got me into this topic for you, like, give me one team that you think might be a lot worse in their current offseason projection, and what's a sleeper team that you like right now heading into training camp?
You know that I can't say two nice things about the Buffalo Bills on consecutive days. I hyped up Josh Allen yesterday.
That's fair.
But that roster's taken a major hit. And I don't think it's any disrespect to the guys that they have there that are leading that team. I just think losing
huge
guys
overhaul.
like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde is now gone as well, right? Like, you lose some integral parts of that secondary, and Stephon Diggs is traded away. Now you have to find a new number one. That's just a lot of question marks for a contending team, right? Like, if I'm talking about a team I think is going to ascend, man, Green Bay and Houston.
I agree.
Watch out. Green Bay, Houston, probably throw Chicago in there, like these young teams where Josh Allen was a couple years ago with the Bills, right? Like a young team that has this quarterback on a rookie deal, and you have a bunch of weapons around him. Those three teams, all young quarterbacks, all very good weapons right now. you got to watch out for the young kids. That's the league. That's what it is. The league is turning into a young man's game, and those guys playing the quarterback position, they could ball. Dude. They're all super good, and Jordan Love finally is hitting that elevation curve, that next level of evaluation like we had thought he would get to. And CJ Stroud is taking the league by storm, and Caleb Williams, I saw what he could do in the Pac-12. I watched basically every snap the kid ever played. He's just a freak of nature.
Isn't it crazy? Like 4 quarterbacks in the league right now that are starting have rings, and that's it. I mean, I feel like the league has never been younger at quarterback.
Parity is back.
It's Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Matt Stafford, and Patrick Mahomes. Nobody else. There's 28 quarterbacks right now in the league that are looking for their first ring, which I think is cool. And I agree. I think Packers, Texans, the AFC South is chaos right now, and Houston's the favorite. Jacksonville probably should bounce back. People love the hype of Anthony Richardson. I kind of like the Titans as a sleeper. If Will Levis can rein it in, and he's kind of right now like 2019 Josh Allen, where the variance is just so insane. He's fun to watch, but will it turn into wins? I'm not sure. But what Tennessee did, like they brought in Cushenberry, they drafted Latham from Alabama, like they brought in some legitimate offensive line help, Tony Pollard and Spears in the backfield. They've got DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. They traded for L'Jarius Sneed. Like they have Jeffrey Simmons up front. I loved their draft class too. I mean, they got a bunch of my guys. I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff team this year, but they're going to be a Sunday ticket team for me, where they're going to be a lot more competitive than I think people think. If Will Levis is not 2020 Carson Wentz, 2018, like just roller coaster ride, Josh Allen or Jameis Winston.
Yeah, the quarterback theory is kind of Will Levis in a hole, right?
Yeah.
How far can you go with the chaos, and how much can that chaos bring?
His aggressive throw percentage, was higher than almost anybody by a long shot last
It's like every person listening right now that bought the new college football game. It's like we're throwing into these windows that deserve no throws at all.
You're like, no. And then like, oh, it worked out that time, and half the time it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Levis is a great point to what I was bringing up in our quarterback conversation. Like, why was he given a chance? Well, Ryan Tannehill wasn't putting the ball downfield, getting the guys an opportunity. What does this kid Levis do? He's coming out there. He's chucking the ball downfield, giving his guys all of the love in the air. That's why you get a team to fall in love with those guys, and they play behind the Josh Allens, and they play behind the CJ Strouds, and these teams that we're talking about. And I don't know, going back to your San Francisco point, I don't know if this is the year.
I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but the downfall feels like it's coming. Yeah. They're not rising anymore.
Our team is paying a premier running back and 2 premier wide receivers. So miss me with the excuses of why you can't.
Well, they're about to give a big contract to Brock Purdy. Maybe that's why they're holding back from paying Brandon Ayuk. I don't know. But yeah, maybe you're right. I don't think they're going to be bad this year. They're still the favorite in the NFC, but it does feel like
the downright number 1 contender?
They're coming down from the mountain.
Yeah. I think there's a better case that there will be a closer group NFC, like Detroit, Philadelphia, San Francisco, than it was last year.
Yeah, there won't be a clear gap.
Like there was like a gap. You definitely knew there was a gap, right? Like it was San Fran, Detroit,
and the rest.
Then whoever else was there. Yeah. I think the parity is going to be a lot closer.
Because even like in Arizona is going to be, as much as I can't stand Jonathan Gannon, like Arizona, I think is going to be competitive with Kyler Murray. I know it's going to kill you to say anything nice about it.
I'm not talking about him.
No, I feel you. I respect
What about
that.
Seattle, man? Like
Seattle
count them out too.
No, I love their roster. If Geno Smith is who he was 2 years ago, like that's a competitive football team too. Same with Reek Woolen if he bounces back. There's a lot of good teams. I totally agree.
We could say our non-Eagles take. The NFC is going to be way freaking better than it was last year.
I still don't think it's the quarterback conference of the AFC, but roster-wise, it is really good.
Oh, it's much better. And there's going to be teams. I mean, week 1, you're playing Green Bay, teams that are going to be pushing the pace right out of the gate. And I think it's to the betterment of the Eagles, Lou. I think that I said this on a show the other day that I love when the quarterbacks in the East are great because they push the envelope. And somebody in our YouTube comments was like, I would love if you play quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm like, no, then that doesn't drive competition at all. Like, I get it, but you want these guys to be looking over their shoulder and say, can I handle the pressure? That's where you really separate the good from the great to the elite. And this is where you have to be. You can't pull in England to get to the Euro final by playing the worst teams on the continent. You have to play good football teams.
And by the way, Gino did play quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys 4 years ago. His name was Ben DiNucci, and he almost beat Carson Wentz on Sunday.
Is that an Italian joke? I don't know.
Yes, it absolutely was. All right, that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen each and every day. Got 2 more shows for you this week, and then Eagles training camp starts up next week. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.